In this video, we are going to be covering, is rentvesting becoming the new norm for first home buyers? It is getting increasingly difficult to be able to purchase a home to live in a location that you actually want to live in. So is rentvesting the new norm, and is rentvesting right for you? If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. I talk about everything property and personal finance and everything you can do to get yourself ahead. Today, we're going to be talking about rentvesting, and is that becoming the new norm? So this video, we're going to be covering what is rentvesting, why is it taking off in 2025 leading into 2026, how can you make rentvesting work for you, and all the tax incentives and realities that you might be facing if you're considering rentvesting or investing in property in general, and also the risks and pitfalls when it comes to rentvesting. So first, we're going to start with what is rentvesting. Now, I want you to forget the old, buy where you live. Rentvesting is flipping the script. Buying where you live is something that a lot of people want you to do, what a lot of our parents did when they first bought property, but it's not the reality anymore. It's very difficult to be able to purchase where you want to live efficiently. Rentvesting allows you to create more flexibility. You rent in a suburb that suits your lifestyle, maybe near the beach, close to work, or even close to family and friends, while you purchase an investment in a location that you can afford. So right now, I have a client that is currently renting in the middle of the Melbourne CBD because that's close to his work and what he wants to do. And he's now purchasing an investment property in regional Victoria. So these are the kinds of strategies that people are implementing to get themselves ahead with the deposits they have saved up, because it's becoming difficult to be able to purchase close to the city or close to where this person works. The point of rentvesting is for you to understand that you need to separate your lifestyle choices from your wealth building choices, and the numbers just make sense. So let's look at my own personal position. If I'm going to buy where I'm living right now in this beautiful apartment, it would cost me upwards of $4,500 per month. Now, because we're renting, it costs less than $2,700 a month, $2,700. That is a huge difference, and the excess we are able to allocate to other investments, thus getting us ahead. So when the time comes that we have enough saved up, we're able to then go ahead and purchase in this area with not such a large damaging mortgage. So that's what rentvesting is all about. It's getting yourself into the financial position to be able to buy in a location you want to live in long term. Now, this might be self-explanatory now that we're going through this a little more, but why is it taking off in 2025? It's not a passing trend. The numbers tell the story. Home prices have hit record highs in July of 2025, up almost 5% in the last year alone, in a time that we were told home prices weren't going up too quickly. Here in Melbourne, we've had a stagnating sort of period with our home prices, but this is slowly starting to change. Now, national rental vacancies are at just 1.2%. That is only 38,000 vacancies across the entire country. Think about how wild that is for a statistic. Demand is sky high for rentals. So yes, you're putting yourself in the rental cycle. However, these higher priced, more desirable rentals generally have a lower level of demand as opposed to those with a more affordable price tag. So what does that mean if you're renting? It probably means that your rent is going to go up, sometimes by $50 a week, sometimes by a couple hundred. Landlords know they have the upper hand because dozens of applicants apply for decent places that are in an affordable postcode. Now, because you are a rentvestor, your rent might have gone up as well. And you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't I be better off owning something myself? And you know what? Sometimes that answer may be yes, if you can afford where you want to live and if the numbers stack up. And we're going to get into at the bottom the lifestyle aspect of this scenario. And if it doesn't suit your lifestyle to rentvest, then you don't have to do it. This is just what some people do and what I am doing personally. Yes, the Reserve Bank of Australia has trimmed the cash rate back to 3.6%, but the serviceability buffer rates set by APRA haven't budged. This means your borrowing capacity is not magically increasing overnight, okay? Yes, it's getting a little bit better, but there's still serviceability buffer rates to protect people's back pockets. And I think they're actually a fantastic thing to be having there. For a lot of people, rentvesting becomes the middle ground and the place that just makes sense for a lot of different scenarios. You accept that your personal living expenses, so your rent, is higher than you might like it to be, but you're also using your borrowing power to buy somewhere else that's affordable, and then using that rent and the tax incentives to pay the mortgage and grow your wealth. Now, full disclosure, negative gearing is not a strategy. If you are planning on buying a property so you can lose money to write off on tax, bad strategy. I suggest you get some better advice if that's the only reason you're buying an investment property. Next, let's look at how to make rent vesting work. But before we keep going, if you are someone who is looking to buy property, whether it's to invest in or to live in, and you need a trusted mortgage broker to take you through the process from start to finish, there is a link down below to book a one-on-one call with me. Rent vesting only works if numbers stack up. First, look for all the areas with healthy rental yields and low vacancy rates. That way you are less likely to have the property sitting empty while you're paying your own rent and the mortgage on your new investment property. Second, you need to stress test your cash flow. Ask yourself in this situation, what happens if rates climb again? Or worst case, what happens if your property sits vacant for 6 weeks, which when you buy a property is a real reality because there's time for advertising if it's not already rented out. And then there's time for someone to say, well, I'm actually ready to move in on X date. And you might have a 4 to 6 week period where you don't actually have a tenant helping you pay that mortgage. If that's going to break you financially, you need a better buffer and you need a better strategy. Thirdly, I want you to think about your loan structure. Interest-only repayments can free up your cash flow in the short term, especially if you're reinvesting the difference, but it will cost you more interest over the life of the loan. So a brief summary, if you have a 30-year loan term and a 2-year interest-only period, you're only paying interest completely for the first 2 years and then need to pay down the principal in the following 28 years. Overall, you'd have a higher interest rate and you'd be paying more interest over time. Now, principal and interest repayments are generally a little bit higher, but that's because you're actually actively paying down the loan at the same time. You're reducing the debt from day one. And don't forget your offset. An offset account linked to an investment loan can give you massive flexibility. So this is a little cheat sheet down the bottom here. Offset linked to interest only can actually reduce your monthly charge. Offset linked to principal and interest will reduce only the interest charge, but your repayment stays the same. So the best way to describe this is imagine one square. If you're paying just interest and you have money in your offset account, that square is starting to decrease. However, if you're paying principal and interest repayments, you now have a square with a line through the middle. Your square is your principal and interest repayment that does not change. What does change when you have offset money sitting there linked to that loan is that the interest portion is getting smaller and the principal portion is getting larger, meaning you're paying more of the loan off faster with every single repayment, but you're not actively reducing the amount of money that comes out of your bank account. It's an important distinction to understand. Next, we'll look at the tax and incentives for investment properties. The biggest mistake people can make when rent vesting is to think that the tax benefits will magically make everything work. If your property is income producing, meaning that you've got tenants paying rent, then the interest on your investment loan can generally be tax deductible. That includes loans that are interest only and even the portion of your repayments that are interest if you're on P&I repayments. And another one is that if you eventually sell the property and you've owned it for more than 12 months, you may be eligible for a 50% capital gains tax discount. This means you only pay CGT on half of the capital gain. This is another attractive tax incentive here in Australia that if you do make a significant gain on a property that you're investing in or a significant gain in an investment in general, if you've held it for 12 months, you're going to get a good discount on the tax you need to pay. It is important to note that on the property that you are living in, there is no capital gains tax that is effective. So if you sell your home that you live in for a huge profit, even millions of dollars in profit, you don't pay any tax on that because it was your principal place of residence. This is also another very good tax incentive here in Australia. Another thing that's important is when you're buying your first property, when you buy your first home, we all talk about stamp duty concessions, first home guarantees, how to save money, how to get money off the government, all this kind of stuff. When you buy an investment, you get none of that. You generally can't get the first home owners grant or stamp duty concessions if you don't live in the property as your main residence. So if you're buying an investment, you don't get stamp duty concessions. So just remember that. The rules vary state by state here, but most will actually require you to move in within 12 months of the settlement of that property if you're going to claim any of these tax exemptions, and live there for at least 6 months to keep these perks. The most effective thing we have here in Australia for first home buyers is not paying stamp duty on your first purchase. Some states will actually allow you to keep your stamp duty benefit for when you purchase your first home to live in. So if you purchase a property, especially here in Victoria, as an investment, it doesn't matter because you've never lived in the property, you still get to claim the stamp duty concession or exemption if it fits the scenario that you're playing in. However, you will lose access to the 5% deposit scheme. This here is designed for people with low deposits to be able to get into their first homes so they have somewhere stable to live. If you're someone who's invested in property before, generally you won't be eligible for this. And look, if you've invested in property right, you probably won't need to use the 5% deposit scheme either. So just remember, if you start your property journey with an investment instead of a home, you're saying goodbye to a lot of the first home buyer incentives. That's the trade-off. You get into the market sooner, but you have to fund it entirely yourself. There are other strategies to be able to leverage your family's equity as well with a parental guarantee loan, a very popular way to purchase an investment property, but that's another video altogether. And let's just clear this up. Negative gearing is not free money. It's a tax offset that helps reduce your taxable income when your investment costs you more than it earns in rent. You're still spending the money. You're just getting a portion of it back at tax time. And finally, let's get into the risks and pitfalls of rent vesting. Rent vesting is powerful, but it's not a silver bullet. The first big risk is buying the wrong property. If you choose an area with poor growth prospects or a rental market that's already oversupplied, you can almost guarantee you will end up with a flatlining asset that drains your cash. Second is going to be over leveraging. It is super tempting to borrow as much as you can from the bank, especially if they're willing to give it to you. Especially if this property that you're eyeing off is a higher yielding property, because one unexpected cost, a vacancy or a repair bill, even a rate rise, that's not out of the question, and suddenly you're scrambling to cover your repayments. You need to properly cash flow this out and have a buffer. Buying an investment property, you should be running it like a little business. You need to have breathing room in your budget to make sure you're not going to be financially stressed and your own personal life isn't affected. And now third is one that's more recently come up. It's policy changes. Negative gearing and CGT discounts have been political footballs for years. And if the rules change while you own a property, your returns can take a hit. Just remember, tax laws are not locked in forever. There's been fresh debates over negative gearing where some want it limited to just new builds and others want it scrapped altogether. Make sure you're doing your research and understanding what's happening on the political landscape when it comes to these sorts of taxes, because it's going to directly affect your investment prospects. And something now that I'm suggesting to a lot of people is that you need to work out the costs even without the tax perks. Now, it's important to stay up to date with any changes or potential changes so you can identify any risks that may be presented to you. Lastly, the most important thing I want you to consider is actually your lifestyle. This is the main overarching question. Rent vesting gives you flexibility, but if stability is what you need, then buying an owner-occupied home, that's actually probably for you. Rent vesting is not for everyone. It's not a lifestyle that everyone can live. Long-term renting can seem a little bit uneasy for a lot of people. Rent vesting is a very active strategy, and you need to consistently be reviewing the numbers year after year to ensure it's still the best strategy for you. So now, after hearing all of that, is rent vesting for you?